After 12 years and 177 episodes, the Walking Dead TV show has finally ended. A lot of people stopped watching along the way, but I stuck with it right to the end. In fact, I'd already done the same with the comic, following it from its first volume in 2003, right through to its ending in 2019. But which ending did a better job of wrapping up its long-running saga? Let's take a look at both and find out. When I originally read the comics, they were always several years ahead of the TV show, so going back to them again after seeing the adaptation is an interesting experience. For one thing, the cast is almost completely different. Characters such as Rick and Carl and Michonne have long since left the show, but in the comic they're right there till the end. And it's really interesting to see them interacting with all the Commonwealth characters, particularly Mercer, who looks exactly the same in the comic as he does on screen. You can't help feeling that the show would have been a lot better if they managed to keep these original characters right till the end. This version of the Commonwealth is also a lot tamer than the one on screen. It's maybe on the verge of becoming a complete dictatorship, but it's not quite there yet. A lot of the tension of the last few issues revolves around whether Rick Grimes is going to take over as leader of the Commonwealth, as he has done with just about every settlement he's encountered over the course of the entire comic. But when things finally come to a head, Rick makes a really long speech that goes on and on and on and on and on, and eventually manages to calm everyone down, or possibly send them to sleep. This may seem like a bit of an anticlimax, and a rather weak way to end the conflict that's been bubbling up for the last few dozen issues. But it's not over yet, as at the end of the issue, the governor's son Sebastian, who's as much of a git here as he is in the show, barges into Rick's hotel room and shoots him dead. After an issue showing the immediate aftermath of this, the final issue then picks up several decades later, where Carl is living happily with Sophia and their daughter, and the world is so safe that walkers are never seen, except in the wildest areas. In fact, Carl gets into trouble for killing one, as it's the property of Maggie's son, who has grown up to become a right spoiled brat, and runs a travelling show showing off walkers to people who have never seen them before, but without taking the precaution of removing their teeth, so they're still incredibly dangerous. Carl goes on trial, but after Maggie intervenes, he gets let off, as long as he promises to replace the dead walker with a new one. But he just kills all the remaining walkers instead. The rest of the issue is really a road trip to show how peaceful this world has become now, and it's clearly a very different place to how it was when the majority of the book took place. And Carl gets to check in on older versions of all the remaining characters. So there's not much action, but for anyone who's followed the comic for 192 issues, it does provide a decent sense of closure, and you feel the characters are going to be just fine from here on in. And you have to hand it to Robert Kirkman. He could have kept on churning out issues indefinitely, or handed the story over to another writer and kept on raking in the money. But fair play to him, he gave it a proper ending and walked away. Now he's just writing a new book called Firepower, which is about martial arts or something. Yeah, good luck with that, Robert. It's not the 70s. As to the TV show, they obviously couldn't end it the same way. For one thing, Carl and Sophia were both killed off years ago, and for another, it would not be the end of the franchise. There have already been 3 spin-off shows, Fear the Walking Dead, Tales of the Walking Dead, The Walking Dead World Beyond, and there's at least another 3 in development, which this finale had to lay the groundwork for. Throughout this final season, they have been telling an alternative version of the Commonwealth arc from the comics, but instead of subtly building tension, the show pretty soon makes it clear that it's an outright dictatorship, which oppresses its citizens and throws its enemies into work camps. It's a lot less subtle than the source material, but it's also a lot more exciting, which is what you want from an action-adventure series. And while in the books there's a horde of zombies on its way to overrun the Commonwealth, but it gets diverted at the last moment so they don't do too much damage. In the show, the horde fully invades the city, and the first half of the finale is one big battle scene. This is as good as any action scene the show has had before. The production team are experts in this sort of thing by now. And with it being the final episode, the plot armour that usually shields the regulars is gone for once. Luke dies early on, which is hardly a big loss, as the character's barely been in the show lately. But the scenes of all his friends mourning over his death is one of the rawest displays of grief ever seen in the show. Rosita also dies, but at this point it seems like she miraculously survives. And after the zombies are dealt with, the Governor of the Commonwealth is finally taken down, in a much more dramatic fashion than in the comics, which is a lot more satisfying. The rest of the episode is a lot quieter, and is mainly about tying up the characters we've been watching for 11 seasons. Rosita has a long, drawn-out death scene, which is a bit syrupy, but she was one of the longest-serving characters, and I guess they needed a big emotional farewell to give the finale some heart. Personally, I think it would have been a lot more fitting if they'd killed off Carol instead. Her death would have been a lot more emotional, as she's been in the series since the beginning. And Melissa McBride is one of the best actors they have, so she would obviously have knocked it out of the park. But I guess at the time they were still hoping for her to appear in one of the spin-offs. Daryl gets a scene where he goes off on his motorbike, presumably setting up the spin-off, in which he somehow bikes all the way to France. And Maggie and Negan get a scene to set up their odd couple relationship, ready for their own spin-off, which you would never have imagined happening 7 years ago, when he bashed her husband's skull in. The big surprise was getting to see Rick and Michonne again, although very briefly. They were originally going to make 3 movies following their story, but now that's been downgraded to just another series. Still, that is the most anticipated of all the spin-offs, as their characters' fates have been left a mystery for 4 years now, so it will be good to finally get some closure on that. So the 2 finales are very different stories, despite starting with many of the same elements. The comic is much more slower paced, at least at this phase. Part of the draw of the earlier issues was that it seemed that any character could be killed off at any time, but towards the end it got a lot safer, and killing off Rick was about the only surprise they had left. It seemed Robert Kirkman was far more interested in churning out long philosophical arguments about how people should live their lives, rather than providing any sort of action or spectacle, whereas the show never forgot the need to provide plenty of action and keep viewers entertained. Both approaches do a good job of rounding off their own particular stories, although to be honest, both comic and show peaked around the time of the War with the Saviours, and it's all been downhill after that. So it was something of a miracle that their endings managed to be even halfway decent. That's all for now. I'm here every week talking about TV shows, comics and other nerdy stuff. So subscribe if you want to, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.